Chapter 1: The Impossible Crime. It was in the early weeks of November, when the autumnal fog lay thick upon the streets of London, that the singular affair of the fire that stopped time came into our lives. The morning had been one of peculiar stillness. Even the distant clatter of cart wheels along Baker Street seemed muted, as though the city itself were holding its breath. I had called upon Holmes that day intending no more than a brief social visit, for the weather was inhospitable and my medical practice, by some stroke of fortune, was quiet. I found my friend in his customary position, reclining in the armchair by the fire, his long slender fingers steepled, eyes half closed in the way that denoted he was deep in thought. The coal fire crackled softly, yet I noted that Holmes' gaze was fixed not upon the flames, but upon the small brass clock upon the mantel. He gave a slight start at my arrival, but a faint smile tugged at his lips. "You are earlier than usual, Watson," said he, "and you have brought no patient's complaint with you. A dull day at the surgery, I presume?" I laughed, accustomed to his quick readings of my movements. "Quite right. And so, I thought to trouble you for a cup of tea and perhaps an account of your latest intellectual conquest. Unless, of course, you are engaged upon one at this very moment." "Engaged?" Holmes drew deeply upon his pipe, releasing a stream of smoke that drifted lazily toward the ceiling. "Merely in the business of waiting. My morning post contained a letter which suggested a matter of some singularity will be brought before me today. It is not every day, Watson, that one hears of a fire that burns without consuming." I was about to request clarification when a brisk knock sounded upon the door. Mrs. Hudson admitted a gentleman whose anxious expression was apparent even before his hat had been removed. He was a tall, spare man of perhaps 40, with a narrow face and eyes that darted as though expecting ill news at any moment. His clothing was respectable but disheveled. The left cuff of his coat bore a faint scorched mark. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he asked. Holmes inclined his head. "Pray be seated, Mr. Harding. Benjamin Harding. I manage the vaults at Grimwell's Bank on Chancery Lane. I am here on behalf of the directors, and indeed on behalf of the law itself should the truth be known." Holmes gestured toward me. "This is my friend and associate, Dr. Watson. You may speak freely before him." Mr. Harding sank into the chair opposite Holmes, leaning forward as though to lessen the distance between them. "Gentlemen, something has occurred at our bank, something which, I fear, will bring ruin unless the explanation is found. I scarcely know how to relate it without sounding a madman." Holmes' eyes gleamed. "You will find, sir, that I am not easily startled. Begin at the beginning." Harding swallowed. "At 9 o'clock this morning, our head clerk entered the document archive beneath the main floor. The chamber is sealed by a heavy iron door, opened only by my key and that of the senior director. Inside, upon the central table, he found a metal box containing certain negotiable bonds. Nothing unusual, except that the box was surrounded by blackened scorch marks, as though it had been subjected to fierce flame. And yet," Harding's voice faltered. Holmes prompted him softly. "And yet?" "And yet the paper bonds within were untouched, perfectly intact. The table beneath the box was charred, but the box itself was cool to the touch, as though whatever fire had occurred had spared both it and its contents. And the clock upon the far wall, an old pendulum piece, had stopped at precisely 12 minutes past 8, though no one had entered the room at that time." I could not help exclaiming, "Stopped? By the heat, you mean?" Harding shook his head. "That is what one might expect. But there is no sign of heat damage upon the clock, no soot, no warping. It is as though time itself ceased for that moment." Holmes rose and began pacing, his long fingers clasped behind his back. "You have omitted nothing of the scene?" "Nothing, sir. The directors are in a state of near panic. They fear some infernal device or worse, an inside betrayal masked by this phenomenon." Holmes halted before the window, peering through the fog as though it concealed the answer. "And you say the room is secured by 2 keys, yours and the director's?" "Yes, sir." "And neither of us was present when the fire, if it was a fire, occurred?" Holmes turned sharply. "Then I shall require to see the vault at once. What's in your coat?" "There is more here than the mere appearance of flame without combustion. There is a human hand, and where there is a hand, there is a motive." As we descended the stairs moments later, I caught the quick, suppressed energy in Holmes' step, the unmistakable sign that he had scented a trail. I confess, I felt a curious chill despite the stuffy air of the cab, for it seemed that this case, with its stopped clock and unburnt fire, had already taken on the character of an impossibility. If I begin the next chapter, I can take us straight into Holmes' first deductions at the scene, carefully planting the earliest clues without yet betraying his reasoning. Would you like me to continue directly into Chapter 2 so the mystery flows without break? Chapter 2. Holmes hears the mechanism. The fog had thickened by the time we hailed a cab, beating the glass with a damp which blurred the procession of indistinct forms along Baker Street. Mr. Harding sat opposite us, his hat clenched upon his knee, and cast nervous glances through the window as though even the city's shapeless shadows might whisper the disgrace of Grimwell's. Holmes, whose humors were as variable as a barometer, relaxed into a curious ease that I had learned to read as concentration. He watched our visitor with a languid eye that missed nothing. "You did not sleep last night, Mr. Harding?" he observed. Not because the matter had then arisen, but due to a separate anxiety which was resolved, unsatisfactorily, at 10 minutes past 6 this morning. "It accounts for your decision to go to the bank earlier than customary." Harding stared. "Upon my word, how?" "The left cuff of your shirt shows the faint impressed ridges of an iron, and the starch has set in a manner that speaks of hurried pressing after washing. The odor of common lye clings to it. Labels of laundries in your neighborhood use it past moderation. One irons so early only after a sleepless night. Your boots too tell their tale. The damp upon them is not the universal fog but the peculiar splash of milk upon the toe. Your steps carried you past a milk cart making its early rounds. And finally, you carry the stiffness of a man who has risen from an armchair rather than a bed." Harding colored faintly, and some portion of the tension about his lips eased, as if Holmes's display of deduction, however intrusive, reassured him that he had come to the right address. "It is true that I have been preoccupied, Mr. Holmes, though with a trivial domestic matter I should be ashamed to relate at such a time." "Domestics are seldom trivial to those entangled in them," murmured Holmes. "This morning's events at the bank, tell me again, but as one who rereads a page to mark not the sense but the punctuation. Attend to the smaller points." Harding took a breath. "Our archive vault is below the public hall, stone-walled, arched, with an iron door secured by 2 mortice locks. The senior director, Mr. Percival Grimwell, holds one key and I the other. Within there are 3 tables of oak, a catalogue desk and a single pendulum clock. We do not permit candles. The vault is lit by a gas jet with a wire guard. This morning at 9 Mr. Lionel Vetch, our head clerk, entered in my company to retrieve a tin box containing Royal Loyalist bonds. We found it upon the middle table, ringed by char as if a burner had been applied beneath. The wood had blackened, the air was stale with a faint sourness, yet the paper within the box lay immaculate. The box itself was cool, barely tepid. And the clock, that sober old timekeeper, stood at 8:12. Holmes's eyelids drooped. Gas but no candles. A vault of stone, air scarce. No draughts. None that I have ever felt, sir. It is dry and close. The jet was off when we entered. And who last entered the vault before your 9 o'clock? Yesterday at 2 in the afternoon. Mr. Vetch and I performed the routine inventory. Everything was in order. Who has access besides yourself and Mr. Grimwell? There is a night watchman upon the premises, Mullins, but he has no key to the vault. Only Mr. Grimwell and I hold them. The junior clerks may consult documents in a reading room above, never below. Holmes steepled his fingers. You spoke of a sourness in the air, like what? Harding frowned in recollection. Not smoke precisely. A faint acrid tang. I remarked upon it, and Mr. Vetch said it was perhaps from the extinguished gas. Do you commonly note it upon turning off a jet? Not ordinarily. Holmes made a soft sound that might have been approval. A clock that stops without scorching, a fire that blackens only where it pleases, papers untouched, a vault without draught. There is a mechanism here, Watson, a mechanism cloaked in misdirection. And the box? I put in. Could its tin have deflected the heat? A tin box that remains cool while the table chars beneath? A remarkable conductor indeed, Holmes returned. No, there is some human arrangement. The question is not only how but why. For what purpose does one contrive a spectacle that burns without burning? To frighten, perhaps, said Harding despondently. Or to make us believe in forces beyond our management, and thus to cover some theft we have not yet discovered. Possibly. Equally possible that it is a message addressed to one particular pair of eyes. Holmes's gaze traveled from Harding's scorched cuff to the faint tremor in his right hand. Tell me of your director, Mr. Grimwell. Harding hesitated. Mr. Percival Grimwell is a man of probity and precision. He is exacting but fair. He has guided the bank through 2 difficult seasons with admirable prudence. Holmes's mouth curled at one corner. You are loyal to him. I owe him my appointment. And yet you do not like him. Harding's expression wavered. He is distant. Distant men make close enemies, Holmes said lightly. Who else has stood near this matter? Your head clerk, Vetch, did you say? Mr. Lionel Vetch. Capable, thorough, conservative in habits and opinions. He has been with Grimwell's 12 years. He accompanies me on every inspection. He, Harding paused, then continued reluctantly, is engaged to marry Mr. Grimwell's niece. Ah. Holmes's interjection was so soft one might have missed it. And the niece, does she move in the bank circles? She has lately visited her uncle upon various charitable concerns. Miss Clara Grimwell. An intelligent young lady if somewhat idealistic. Any other personages of note? Our junior clerks, a young fellow named Saunders, bright but impulsive, and Miss Ada Sloane, who keeps the catalogues with exceptional neatness. The porter, Briggs, who answers the front, and Mullins, the night watchman, a veteran with a limp. Holmes made a list of the names in his pocketbook with that neat insectal script of his. And now, how do we arrive at 8:12? Harding spread his hands. I cannot say. Nor can I, yet. But consider, Watson, a clock ceases not at the hour one discovers the scene, but at a time prior. That time must represent either the moment of some mechanical interference, something that arrested the pendulum, or it is a deliberate planting to mislead. You have not examined the clock, I ventured. I shall, Holmes replied, with a detachment that no official can muster when ruin seems to hover over columns of figures. Our friend here is a manager. Managers dread the intangible. That is why this business of a fire that does not burn is so cleverly pitched. It plays upon men's nerves. Yet the material world, however much it apes miracles, answers to laws. I propose we remind it of that fact. We had reached Chancery Lane, where the fog, confined by the narrow street and the high somber lines of the law offices, took on the character of a grey wall. The bank of Grimwell and Company presented a stone face to the world, dignified without ostentation. Within, the hush proper to such establishments lay upon marble floors and dark counters, broken only by the scratch of quills and the soft tread of clerks. A thin man with a parchment complexion materialized to take Mr. Harding's coat and, with many bows, led us to a private room lined with ledgers. Briggs, Harding said shortly, if Mr. Grimwell returns, ask him to join us. And send Mr. Vetch. Very good, sir. The porter vanished. Holmes did not sit. He moved lightly about the room, his eyes flicking to a blot of ink here, a scuff upon the floor there. He opened a window a fraction and sniffed, shut it, and then, to my surprise, crossed to a coat stand where a single cap hung. A stout watchman's cap, rim worn, a trace of coal ash upon the brim. Mullins, Harding supplied. He leaves it when he goes off duty. He is above reproach. No doubt, Holmes said absently, dusting a finger across the brim. And yet even the innocent track the guilty in their dust. He returned to the table. Before we descend, one question. Was anything moved in the vault between your discovery and your departure to fetch me? Nothing. I had the presence of mind to order the door sealed and to send for you at once. Mr. Vetch remains below to ensure no one tampers. Holmes inclined his head. Soundly done. He regarded Harding with that unflinching attention which, I confess, can make even the blameless uneasy. You are a conscientious man, Mr. Harding. You believe the bank's honor is your own. That sense will serve us. But it may also blind you to possibilities you would rather not admit. I must therefore ask that you answer without reserve, even where the answer pains you. I shall, Harding said quietly. The door opened to admit a fair, compact gentleman in his middle 30s whose round spectacles lent him an air of earnestness. He bowed to Harding and then to us in turn. Mr. Vetch, at your service. You are Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I confess I am grateful to see you. This occurrence is detestable. Holmes's bow was hardly more than a tilt of the head. Mr. Vetch, we shall be friends if you are exact. We proceed to the vault. Before that, tell me in a sentence, what most astonished you this morning? Vetch's hands tightened upon the ledger he carried. The absence of heat, he said after a moment. I went expecting scalding metal, smoldering wood. Instead, the table was black, the box was cool, and the air had that peculiar sting, like vinegar, but it did not burn the throat. Holmes's eyes brightened. Vinegar. You are certain? It is the nearest word I have, Vetch admitted. Not true vinegar. Sharper. Thinner. Holmes's gaze went abstract. Sharper. Thinner. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Vetch. We shall go down. As we passed through the corridor toward the stair that led below, We met a gentleman whose upright carriage and clipped white whiskers proclaimed him even before Harding murmured, "Mr. Grimwell." The director inclined his head with chilly civility. His eyes, grey and penetrating, rested upon Holmes as one appraises a tool, useful perhaps but not admired. "You have been summoned, sir," he said. "Pray discharge your function quickly. We cannot afford theatricals." Holmes's smile was amiable and empty. "The stage detests me, Mr. Grimwell. I am devoted only to mechanism." "Mechanism?" Grimwell repeated with the faintest knit of the brow. "Of crime," said Holmes. "It clicks, it whirs, it catches if one listens." We descended then, the stone swallowing our steps and the light falling behind us, and even I, who have seen many curious things in Holmes's company, felt in that moment as though we were descending not merely to a vault, but into the very interior of an enigma whose cogs we had yet to see. Chapter 3: The Scene of Deception. The vault lay at the foot of a narrow, twisting stair of stone, the steps worn into shallow hollows by many years of cautious descent. A single gas lamp flickered in a bracket upon the wall, throwing our shadows in tall, uneasy shapes ahead of us. The air grew cooler as we went down, though it carried a faint dryness that seemed out of place in such a subterranean place. At the bottom, a broad iron door stood fastened with two substantial locks. Harding withdrew a key from his waistcoat pocket, while Vetch produced another from a thin chain about his neck. They turned them together, the sound of the tumblers echoing dully through the stone passage, and the hinges gave a slow, reluctant creak as the door opened inward. Holmes paused on the threshold, his head tilted slightly as though the room itself had spoken. "Do not enter just yet, gentlemen," he murmured. "Watson, you may note that the air carries a residue, very faint but unmistakable." I sniffed, but could make out only a vague sharpness, metallic and sour at once, not unlike the tang of a struck match long after its flame has died. "I smell it, yes, but I can't place it." "Precisely," said Holmes. "It resists ready identification, which is why it must be examined without the disturbance of footsteps. Mr. Harding, Mr. Vetch, remain here a moment if you please." He stepped inside, his long frame moving with deliberate precision, as though each footfall might mar some delicate arrangement upon the floor. The vault was a high, arched chamber, lined with shelves of ledgers and metal boxes, each labeled with the neat efficiency of a clerk's hand. At the center stood three oak tables, one of which bore the scene Harding had described, a dark, irregular scorch ring marring its surface, the tin box sitting innocently within the blackened halo. Holmes crouched beside the table, his nose level with the char, and examined the edge of the mark with a small lens. He touched it lightly with a finger and rubbed the residue between thumb and forefinger. "Powdery, friable, without the greasy trace of lamp smoke," he muttered. "Interesting." He then examined the box itself, running his hand beneath it, rapping it gently with a knuckle. "Cool indeed," he said, glancing up at Harding. "And yet, what of the underside?" Holmes lifted the box and we all saw that its base was spotless. No charring, no heat marks, no warping of the thin metal. He set it back precisely as it had been. The great pendulum clock stood against the far wall, its hands fixed at 12 minutes past 8. Holmes approached it and, without touching, leaned close to peer within the glass. "The pendulum rests straight," he said quietly. "No sign of obstruction in the arc, Harding. How often is this clock wound?" "Every Friday morning," Harding replied. "Yesterday as usual. It has never stopped before." Holmes made a small sound, neither agreement nor contradiction, and turned his attention to the floor beneath the clock. He took to his knees, examining the flagstones, tracing a finger along the lines of mortar. Presently he produced a thin folding rule from his pocket and measured the distance from the clock to the nearest table, then from the clock to the iron door. "There is no dust here," he said finally, "save what one expects in a room so seldom entered. Yet," he pointed to a faint disturbance along the mortar line, barely perceptible even in the lamplight. "Watson, note the difference in shading." I bent to look. "I see, something lighter?" "As if the stone had been rubbed." "Not rubbed," Holmes corrected. "Shifted." Holmes then moved to the wall opposite, where the gas jet projected from a wire guard. He examined the small brass tap, sniffed at the nozzle, and scraped a minute residue from the guard with his penknife, which he sealed in a small envelope. "We shall learn something from this, I think." At last he straightened, his gaze sweeping the chamber once more, lingering on the scorched table. "This is not the work of random accident. It is, as I feared, a design intended to provoke speculation and fear. The fire that blackens without burning, the clock that stops without damage, These are not ends in themselves but signals. Signals? Harding echoed. Holmes looked at him keenly. Signals to one who knows how to read them. And I mean to do just that. He returned to the table and paced slowly around it, studying the scorch from every angle. At one point he crouched again, his lens almost touching the wood. Then, with a suddenness that made Harding start, he thrust a thin blade into a narrow gap at the table's join and prized loose a small splinter. Ha! He breathed, examining it. The black here is superficial, mere surface effect as though painted on by heat without penetration. How is that possible? I asked. By the judicious application of a brief, intense flame, directed with great precision, and from below rather than above. Harding's eyes widened. From below? But the table is solid. Holmes tapped the wood gently. Solid enough to the eye. Yet I suspect we have a hollow that might serve a purpose. He set his ear to the table, tapped again and smiled faintly. Yes, there is more here than wood. Before Harding could question further, Holmes turned his gaze to the clock once more. And as for our frozen timepiece, there are only 3 ways to stop a pendulum so cleanly without damage. One may arrest it physically, interfere with its mechanism, or remove the motive power altogether. Which, I wonder, has been done here. Without waiting for a reply, he delicately opened the clock's case. The mainspring was intact, the pendulum free, the movement unharmed, yet the winding key lay loose inside as though it had been placed there deliberately. Holmes closed the case without comment. When he finally stepped back from the scene, he had that air I knew well, the faint narrowing of the eyes, the suppressed energy of a mind that had caught sight of its quarry's shadow. Watson, he said, we shall require a list of every person who has set foot in this room within the last fortnight, and the exact times at which they did so. Mr. Harding, you and Mr. Vetch will prepare it for me. I also wish to know who has been in proximity to this clock, even outside the vault. Do not omit the smallest detail. And then? Harding asked. Holmes glanced once more at the stopped clock, then at the blackened ring around the box. Then, he said softly, we shall listen, not to what is said but to what is arranged. Every mechanism makes a sound even when it is meant to be silent. He moved to the doorway, and as we stepped back into the dim passage, I could not help but feel that the air of the vault still clung to us, sharp, acrid, and faintly menacing. Holmes, however, appeared invigorated. Come, Watson. The scene has spoken. Now we must see whether the players will do the same. If you wish, I can take the next chapter straight into Holmes beginning his quiet probing of suspects upstairs, laying the groundwork for the red herring in Act 2. That would keep the momentum of the mystery seamless. Chapter 4. The Gathering of Suspects. We emerged from the vault to the hush of the private corridor, and I was struck anew by the contrast. Below, the dry, sour breath of that contrived phenomenon. Above, the muffled routine of commerce and the faint scratching of quills. Holmes paused a moment on the stair as if to let the silence settle into him, then touched my sleeve with that quick, light pressure by which he signaled readiness. Mr. Harding, said he, we will require a room where we may speak with your people, singly and without interruption. No alarm, if you please, only the urgency of bookkeeping. Harding, visibly relieved to be directed, ushered us to a narrow chamber off the main hall, a clerk's retiring room with 2 chairs, a small table, and a window that looked upon a dreary well of brick. Vetch slipped away to fetch ink and paper for the list Holmes had requested. Before he could return, the door opened and Mr. Percival Grimwell entered with the manner of one who expects obedience from the air itself. You have seen it, he stated rather than asked. I have seen what someone wished me to see, Holmes replied, all suavity. If you would be so kind, Mr. Grimwell, we shall speak to your staff. Briefly. Grimwell's gray eyes measured him. You will find them diligent. If there is mischief, it is from an intruder. Then we shall rule that out, said Holmes pleasantly. His hand described a small circle toward the door. Your head clerk first. Grimwell's mouth thinned. He tapped the doorframe with 2 fingers, an odd, precise habit, and withdrew. Presently, Lionel Vetch reappeared with his ledger under one arm and an expression of sturdy purpose that I found reassuring. He placed the ledger on the table, squared it carefully, and sat when Holmes gestured. You are exact, Mr. Vetch, Holmes observed. Your relief at our presence this morning was genuine. Yet exact men have their blind points. Before I ask you questions, allow me one remark. You have changed your collar since 9 o'clock. Vetch colored. I noticed a mark of soot upon the earlier one. I did not wish to alarm the juniors. A prudent tidiness, Holmes conceded. Now the list of all who entered the vault in the last fortnight. You and Mr. Harding yesterday at 2, prior to that. Friday last, myself and Miss Sloane to return a ledger. The Wednesday, Mr. Harding alone. Monday, a joint inspection again, and the previous Friday, the usual winding of the clock by Briggs under my eye as Mr. Harding was out. Holmes's eyelids lowered a fraction. Briggs wins the vault clock? Curious. We shall come to it. Tell me, Mr. Vetch, if I say the air below suggested to you vinegar, but thinner, sharper, what say you now? Vetch struggled with it. Yes, though the word is not right. There is a bite without warmth. Good. Precision in imprecision is an ally, Holmes murmured. Your engagement, Mr. Vetch, congratulations. Miss Clara Grimwell is, I am told, intelligent and idealistic. Do you share her idealism? Vetch blinked. I hope so, sir. She is a great encouragement to me. In what direction? In the reform of certain old practices, the bank's charity funds, for instance. She believes we might do more and more openly. Holmes nodded as if to say the matter could rest. That will do for the moment, Mr. Vetch. Please ask Miss Sloane to attend. Vetch rose, grateful to escape the strange currents that Holmes always set in motion, and Miss Ada Sloane entered in his stead. She was a young woman of perhaps 28, plainly dressed, with a clear eye and a mouth that looked as though it had learned not to waste words. She clasped her hands so that the knuckles blanched, then released them when she saw Holmes's relaxed posture. You keep the catalogues, he began, and visited the vault last Friday with Mr. Vetch. Yes, sir. You are methodical, Holmes said, glancing at the minute, regular pinpricks along the edge of a bundle of receipts she carried, each pierced and filed at the exact center. Do you ever deviate from routine? Only when I am obliged, she answered, and her level tone made me smile. Excellent. Did anything oblige you yesterday? No, sir. The inventory proceeded as usual. I remain above most days. The vault stifles me. Holmes's gaze sharpened a hair. Stifles? The air is dry, not close. Few would describe it so. It feels wrong, she said after a moment's visible effort to find her word. As though it takes and does not give. Holmes appeared pleased. Thank you, Miss Sloane. One more thing. Have you observed any alteration in the habits of your colleagues? The porter, Briggs, has been more bustling. He is proud of winding the clock, and boasts of its regularity to the juniors. It is silly, but I suppose it is something for him to own. Holmes made a note. Kindly send in Mr. Briggs. Briggs, when he came, was one of those thin, ingratiating men whose deference seems to drape off them like an extra garment. He bowed, wrung his cap, and cast quick, sidelong glances at the door as if the bank itself might listen. Briggs, Holmes said, amiable, I am told you have the honor of winding the vault clock. That I do, sir. Friday's like a church bell. Never missed, sir. Keeps it true as gospel. Holmes smiled. I admire fidelity to small duties. Tell me, has the clock ever balked? Never, sir. She's a steady old lady. He hesitated, then leaned in the merest fraction. Begging pardon, sir, only, if she stopped now, it weren't my doing. Of course not, Holmes returned smoothly. You wind under Mr. Vetch's eye. Yes, sir. He brightened. And I've a knack for gas too, sir. If a jet plays up, I can coax it. Can you indeed? Holmes looked as one idly interested. A useful knack in a house with so many jets. That will be all, Mr. Briggs. Send Mr. Saunders. The junior clerk, Saunders, bounded in with untidy hair, ink upon one cuff, and the irrepressible air of a young man who believes himself forgiven by nature for his zest. He flung himself into the chair, then sprang up at the barest lift of Holmes's brow and sat again, carefully this time. You like puzzles? Holmes observed without preamble. Saunders laughed. Mr. Vetch says I like them too well. But this is a grim one, sir. A clock stopped, a table burned as if a devil's ring. He flushed at Mr. Harding's frown. Sorry, sir. You were not below this morning, Holmes said. No, sir. Miss Sloane found me a task above. He shot her a grateful glance when she appeared with a fresh ledger for Harding and withdrew again. I suppose she did not want me underfoot. Holmes's eye caught the smear of dark on Saunders' cuff. Ink, not soot, he murmured. And the smell on your fingers, gum arabic, yes. You seal envelopes for the charity fund. Saunders stared. Ido. How? By the line of small cuts upon your left thumb, paper wounds softened by gum. A trifle. Holmes's tone made the word an absolution. You may go, Mr. Saunders. Send the night watchman Mullins. Mullins entered with a stiffness that owed something to the bad leg Harding had mentioned and something to a soldier's lingering pride. His shoulders were still square beneath the shabby coat, and his one good eye, the other clouded with a filmed scar, took in Holmes in a single measuring pass. "You keep the watch," Holmes said. "Did you see or hear anything out of the common in the hours before 8 this morning?" "No, sir," Mullins replied in a steady, low voice. All was quiet. Past 3 a cab clattered by in haste. 5:40 the first milk cart. 6:10 Mr. Harding's step. Holmes's mouth twitched. "Very good. You reckon time by sound." "I learned to, sir," said Mullins and touched the scar at his eye. "You leave your cap here on going off duty?" "I do, sir." "No one cares to carry a watchman's cap about." "True." Holmes's glance rested a breath upon the rim where he had earlier found coal ash. "Do you smoke at your post?" "No, sir. Against the rules. I take my pipe after." "Just so." Holmes's voice softened. "One more question. Do you fancy yourself good with the gas jets?" Mullins's face did not change. "No, sir. I mind the doors in the dark. Mr. Briggs has the jets." "Excellent." Holmes dismissed him with a nod. "Now, Mr. Harding, before we trouble your director again, might we see Miss Clara Grimwell, if she is upon the premises?" Harding looked uneasy. "She is in Mr. Grimwell's office. She came to consult him upon the charity accounts." "Then the coincidence is convenient," Holmes said airily. "Pray ask her." She came a few minutes later, self-possessed and pale, with a direct gaze that reminded me of certain fine-bred horses who will accept a bridle but not a whip. A modest hat framed hair of that shade which seldom reveals itself fully under London's light, somewhere between ash and gold, and her gloved hand rested upon the back of the chair without tremor. "You are Mr. Holmes?" she said. "My uncle has told me you are to probe us all. Pray do so quickly. This atmosphere of suspicion is worse than any indignity." Holmes bowed. "It is not suspicion, Miss Grimwell, but method. You interest yourself in the charity fund. Ye do. I think money hidden does as little good as virtue unpracticed. The fund uses the vault? Occasionally for sealed instructions and pledges. Not this week." She studied Holmes with frank curiosity. "Have you an opinion, Mr. Holmes?" "I have several," he said lightly. "None complete. Did you notice, on entering this house this morning, anything unusual?" She considered. "Only that Briggs was over-civil, and that Mr. Vetch asked for my opinion on a matter as though it mattered, which it did not. And that my uncle's temper is shorter than his whiskers." Holmes's eyes smiled. "You are exact in your own way, Miss Grimwell. That is all for now. You are doing good work, do not be dissuaded." She gave the faintest nod and withdrew, leaving behind a little stir in the stale air, like a window briefly opened. Holmes remained seated for a long moment, fingers steepled, eyes upon nothing visible. Then he rose and crossed to the door. "Mr. Harding," he said, "we shall speak again with your director. After that, lock the vault and let no one enter it without my knowledge. If it must be opened, I shall be present. The appearance of impossibility is the culprit's greatest ally. We must deprive him of his theater." Grimwell received us standing, his expression impatient. "Well? Your staff are capable," Holmes said. "Each possesses a habit or two that might be turned to good or ill by a clever hand. The vault must be closed, Mr. Grimwell. And I require the precise arrangement of your gas lines as they stand beneath this building." "Our gas lines?" Grimwell's brows rose a trifle. "What has gas to do with a stopped clock?" "Everything or nothing," Holmes replied. "At present it is a question. I also require the key to your front door as it was set between 7 and 9 this morning, and the names of your messengers over the past week." Grimwell's jaw hardened. "You demand much." "I demand less than the thief," said Holmes, and the softness of his tone made the words the harder. "Permit me, Mr. Grimwell, or accept a scandal." There was a pause, a weighing on the scale of pride and prudence, and then Grimwell rang for Briggs with an irritable jerk. "Bring Mr. Holmes the gas schematics. And fetch Mullins. And send a boy to the gas company to acquire a duplicate if ours is incomplete." Holmes bowed as if he had been granted a favor. In the corridor again he turned his head the merest fraction toward me. "You observe them, Watson?" "I do, and am no wiser," I confessed. "On the contrary, we are richer by 3 small coins," he said. Briggs the coaxer of jets, his vanity vested in a clock, Miss Sloane's word, stifles, which no timid mind would choose idly, and Vetch's Friday winding under his eye, which means another I was present the week before. "And what of Miss Grimwell?" Holmes's smile was fleeting. An honest barometer of pressure in this house. When she drops, the storm will be upon us. Come, let us hear the gas speak. Chapter 5. The first suspects, a convenient culprit. The schematics arrived in a roll of yellowed vellum, carried by Briggs with an air of grave importance, as though he bore the crown jewels instead of dusty lines and notations. Holmes unrolled them upon the small table in Harding's office, weighting each corner with an inkwell or ledger until the curling was subdued. I leaned in beside him and saw a maze of thin, precise lines, marked with valves, junctions, and the occasional ink blot where some draftsman's hand had hesitated. "These are old," Holmes murmured, running a forefinger along a thick horizontal main that bisected the plan. "But not so old as the building. They will do. See here, Watson, the branch feeding the lower archive. One valve here, another, under the porter's stairs. Curious." Harding shifted uneasily. "That lower valve is never touched. At least not in my time." Holmes's tone was mild. "Never is a dangerous word, Mr. Harding." Before he could elaborate, there was a firm rap upon the door. Vetch entered, his spectacles catching the gaslight. "Inspector Lestrade has called, sir," he announced, a faint note of apology in his voice. "He is in the front hall and insists the matter has been all but solved." Holmes smiled without warmth. "Then let us go and hear what Scotland Yard considers a solution." Lestrade greeted us with his usual brisk efficiency. He was in good spirits, which was never an encouraging sign for those who favored the subtler paths of reasoning. "Holmes, thought I might save you the trouble. Your Mr. Harding here has an employee, Briggs, the porter, who fits the bill perfectly. Access to the building early and late, proud of winding the clock, good with gas fittings. I've half a mind to take him now." Holmes's brows lifted. "And your evidence?" "Evidence? Circumstantial, but plenty of it," Lestrade said cheerfully. "He's been overheard boasting of his skill with jets. The stopped clock, well, who else touches it? As for the scorch, any gas man can contrive a little flare where he wants it. Scare the directors, maybe ring a rise in wages or keep the place in awe of him. Common enough motive." "Indeed," Holmes murmured. "So common that it rarely hides the truth for long." Lestrade took this as agreement. "We'll have him at the Yard within the hour. I'll send a man for him." Holmes raised a hand. "One moment, Lestrade. It would be a pity to move too swiftly. I have not yet completed my examination." The inspector's mouth tightened. "Holmes, I know your ways, but the man's practically confessed in his manner. I spoke with him just now, shifty as a fox in a henhouse. Wouldn't meet my eye." "Perhaps he feared losing his place through no fault of his own," Holmes said coolly. "Fear is a great discomfiture to the gaze." Lestrade shrugged. "Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't point you straight to him." Holmes gave a little bow that might have been gratitude or irony, it was always hard to tell, and returned with me to Harding's office. Briggs, summoned, entered looking pale but composed. "You have been with the bank how long?" Holmes asked. 8 years, sir." "And in all that time you have not once been accused of mishandling your duties?" "No, sir. I take pride in them." "You win the vault clock. Last Friday, was there anything unusual?" Briggs hesitated, then shook his head. "Only that Mr. Vetch asked me to be quick about it, as Mr. Harding was due in a minute and he didn't want us underfoot." "Ah," said Holmes. "And the gas lines, have you ever adjusted them to the archive?" "Never without orders, sir. The valves are stiff as old bones." Holmes's gaze lingered upon him for a long moment, then softened almost imperceptibly. "Thank you. That will be all. And Briggs, if you are wise, you will remain where you may be found." When the door closed, Harding exhaled sharply. "Lestrade will have him yet, Mr. Holmes? You see how it appears." "I see how it appears," Holmes replied, "and how convenient the appearance is. It is too neat, Harding, too ready to hand. True crime seldom presents its actors with such symmetry." He turned to Vetch. "I shall require a word with Miss Grimwell before she leaves the building." Miss Clara entered not long after, curiosity evident in the slight lift of her brow. "Have you found your culprit, Mr. Holmes?" "I have found one prepared for me," Holmes said, and at her faint frown he added, "which is not the same thing. Tell me, Miss Grimwell, on your arrival this morning, did you speak to Briggs?" "I did. He was over-attentive as I said before. He asked if I had noticed any change in the air." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Did you?" She shook her head. "No more than the usual damp." Holmes tapped the table lightly with his forefinger. "Miss Grimwell, please keep our conversation to yourself. Sometimes silence is the most eloquent answer." When she had gone I said, "Holmes, you are determined to shield this Briggs." I did. He was over-attentive, as I said before. He asked if I had noticed any change in the air. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Did you?" She shook her head. "No more than the usual damp." Holmes tapped the table lightly with his forefinger. "Miss Grimwell, please keep our conversation to yourself. Sometimes silence is the most eloquent answer." When she had gone, I said, "Holmes, you are determined to shield this Briggs." "I am determined," he corrected, "to avoid hanging an innocent man in order to clear a ledger of suspicion. There is a larger pattern here, Watson, and we must not be diverted by the ease with which one piece might be plucked out and displayed." He returned to the gas schematic, tracing the lines with that peculiar blend of delicacy and certainty that marked his thinking. "Note, Watson, this lower valve beneath the porter's stair is in a position accessible without entering the vault. And yet, to what end? If the gas jet in the archive were tampered with from without, one might create a brief flare without any visible hand present at the scene. Add to that some means of halting the clock and you have your miracle." "But why?" I asked. Holmes's smile was thin. "That is the question which, once answered, will bring our miracle down to earth. For now, we shall allow Lestrade to believe himself on the scent, while we watch for the real quarry to stir. There is nothing so instructive as a culprit who thinks the chase has gone the wrong way." His gaze went distant for a moment, then sharpened again. "Come, Watson. Let us see how quickly rumor spreads in a house where everyone fears to breathe too loud." With that, he swept up the vellum plans, tucked them under his arm, and moved toward the corridor with the quiet assurance of a man already setting the next snare. I followed, my mind filled with the lingering image of the blackened table, the stopped clock and the sour air in the vault, details that to my eyes still refused to arrange themselves into the clear pattern Holmes so clearly anticipated. If you like, I can take the next chapter into Holmes' discovery of the hidden inconsistency that will overturn Lestrade's theory, beginning the shift into deeper mystery. That would keep the investigation's tension mounting naturally. Chapter 6. The Secret Clue, a Hidden Inconsistency. The bank had settled into that brittle quiet that descends when an unwelcome visitor has departed, but his words still echo in the corridors. Lestrade's confident pronouncement of Briggs's guilt had spread like a draft through the building. One felt it in the way clerks glanced toward the porter's station and then quickly away, as though their eyes might be accused next. Holmes, far from dispelling the rumor, seemed to encourage it by his very inaction, strolling the marble hall as if he were a man with no more than a passing interest in the business. But I, who knew his ways, saw the intent in the slowness of his movements, in the way his gaze touched each door handle, each gas bracket, each strip of worn carpet. It was the stillness of a cat before the spring. "Watson," he said at last, "remain here a moment and note who passes." "I shall be but a minute." With that he vanished through the side door leading to the porter's stair. I stood by the tall clock in the hall, watching Harding consult in hushed tones with Vetch while Miss Sloane busied herself over a stack of ledgers with exaggerated care. Twice I saw Saunders steal a look toward the street door as though hoping for escape. Holmes reappeared almost noiselessly, his hands clasped behind him. He walked past me without a word, but I caught the quick gleam in his eyes and followed him into Harding's office. There he shut the door and unrolled the gas schematic once more. "The lower valve, Watson," he said, tapping the spot beneath the porter's stair, "has been turned in the last 24 hours. The dust upon the wheel is disturbed in a neat crescent where a hand gripped it." "That would seem to confirm Lestrade's suspicion," I ventured. Holmes shook his head. "No, my dear fellow. The crescent lies on the underside of the wheel, where one must reach awkwardly from the stairwell landing. Briggs, who prides himself on his skill, would never turn it so. He would have knelt in the open and taken it cleanly from above. This was done by someone who knew the valve's existence but not its niceties, and who sought to avoid being seen from the hall." I digested this. "That limits the possibilities." "Indeed." Moreover, he reached into his pocket and produced a folded scrap of coarse paper, upon which lay a few grains of a pale, crystalline powder. "From the ledge beneath the gas jet in the vault. I believe it is a residue of ammonium chloride, a compound that, when heated, sublimes into a dense white vapor, leaving the surface beneath cool enough to handle. Imagine, Watson, a brief jet of heated vapor funneling through the gap in the table, enough to blacken the surface but not ignite it, and without scorching the box above. A conjuring trick, but one with a purpose." "And the purpose?" I pressed. "That," Holmes said, folding the scrap away, "is the question still veiled. Yet the means are clear, and they do not point to our unfortunate porter." There was a knock at the door and Harding entered, his face drawn. "Mr. Holmes, Mr. Grimwell requests your presence in his office at once. He has news." We found Grimwell standing by his desk, a folded letter in his hand. His expression was that of a man who has been presented with an indecent proposal and is debating whether to burn it or lock it away. "This arrived not half an hour ago," he said, passing it to Holmes. "It was hand-delivered. Briggs swears he never saw the messenger." The letter was brief, written in a careful, slanted hand. "A demonstration has been made. The next will be more costly. Comply with the request conveyed in due course, and no further harm will come to the property of Grimwell and Company." It bore no signature. Holmes read it twice, then looked up sharply. "You have told no one of this?" "Only you." "Good. Then we hold the advantage for the moment. Mr. Harding, no hint of this is to pass beyond these walls. Mr. Grimwell, I must ask again, what in your affairs would prompt such a threat? It is not an attempt at common burglary. The vault's contents remain untouched." Grimwell's lips thinned. "There are matters in which the bank is engaged, private investments, trusts, which could be vulnerable to scandal. But I will not speak of them unless it proves necessary." Holmes regarded him for a long moment, then said, "It may already be necessary. Nevertheless, I shall respect your discretion, for now. But understand, the author of this letter is the same hand that arranged our morning's miracle, and he is still among us." As we left Grimwell's office, I murmured, "You think the culprit is within the bank?" Holmes's eyes glinted. "I think he, or she, was in a position to adjust that valve unseen, to enter the vault without record, and to leave a message meant for one man's eyes. That narrows our field considerably." We returned to Harding's office, where Lestrade awaited us, still buoyed by his theory. "Well, Holmes, have you finished chasing shadows? I've half a mind to take Briggs before he does a vanishing act." Holmes's expression was one of bland indifference. "By all means, Lestrade, if you wish to hand the true culprit a fine opportunity to vanish while you are occupied with the wrong man. I, for one, prefer to keep him where I can watch him." Lestrade snorted but, perhaps mindful of past embarrassments, refrained from argument. He left with a curt word to Harding to keep the porter close at hand. When the inspector's footsteps had faded, Holmes leaned across the table toward me. "We are entering the dangerous phase, Watson. The false scent is laid. Lestrade will worry it like a terrier. Meanwhile, our adversary will feel secure enough to move again. We must be ready when he does." "And in the meantime?" I asked. "In the meantime," Holmes said, "we observe. A man who tampers with gas lines, blackens wood without burning, and stops clocks without touching them is a man who enjoys control. Deprive him of it and he will seek to reassert it, in haste. That is when he will make the misstep we require." He stood, taking his hat from the peg. "Come, Watson. The afternoon light is poor for observation in this fog, but the ears serve well enough. Let us see what the street has to say of Grimwell's bank." As we stepped out into the grey murk, I could not help but feel that the fog itself had taken on a new character, no longer merely the city's breath, but the chosen cloak of an unseen hand, one that had reached into a sealed vault and left behind a puzzle whose pieces Holmes alone seemed already to glimpse in their proper place. Chapter 7. The Crime Grows Stranger. Holmes and I walked the length of Chancery Lane twice in the damp November fog, our boots scuffing over the wet stones, before he seemed satisfied with whatever silent measurements he was making. He kept his gaze not on the faces of the passers-by, but on their hands, their gait, and occasionally the direction in which their eyes lingered as they approached the bank's sober facade. "Curious," he murmured as we paused at the far corner. "The crowd outside a bank tells you more than its ledgers. Watch the eyes, Watson, those that look too long and those that do not look at all." Before I could ask his meaning, Harding appeared in the doorway, his manner tight with suppressed urgency. "Mr. Holmes, if you please. Something has occurred upstairs. I thought you should see it before others do." Holmes's pace quickened, and I had to lengthen my stride to keep up. We mounted the broad staircase to the director's floor, where Harding led us into a side room used for private consultations with clients. On the heavy mahogany table at the center lay a sheaf of bond certificates, spread in careful disorder, as though someone had examined them in haste. A blot of dark ink marred the green edge of one certificate. Beside it lay an uncapped pen, still damp. Holmes's gaze swept the room. "When was this last locked?" "This morning before we went down to the vault," Harding said. "Mr. Grimwell keeps the only key besides myself." "And you discovered it thus?" "Mr. Vetch did, 10 minutes ago. He came looking for a file and found the door ajar." Holmes picked up the pen delicately, holding it to his nose. The ink is fresh, but this pen has not been used to write. No paper bears its stroke. What do you suppose? I began. Patience, Watson. He laid the pen down, then examined the certificates without touching them. Notice, only the top few are displaced. The rest remain aligned. A hand here, but a careful one, perhaps interrupted. Harding glanced at the door. Interrupted by what? Holmes looked past him. That is what we must learn. Who else was on this floor in the last quarter hour? Only Mr. Grimwell, Miss Clara, and Mr. Vetch. Miss Sloane and Saunders were below. And Lestrade. He left not 5 minutes before Vetch found this. Holmes's expression did not change, but I saw his eyes sharpen. Very good. Now, do these certificates belong to the bank? They are held in trust for a client, Harding said. Their disappearance would be most damaging. Holmes turned toward the window, peering through the fog. Not stolen, merely touched. What? To verify their presence? To plant something among them? Or to remove some mark invisible to the casual eye? He bent low over the bonds, drawing from his pocket the small convex lens I had seen him use 100 times. For several minutes he examined the edges, the printed text, and the watermark. Then he straightened. There is a faint grain of crystalline powder between the top and second sheets, the same I found in the vault. Whoever contrived this morning's spectacle has been here as well. Harding's face paled. Then it is not Briggs. It was never Briggs, Holmes said almost absently. No, this is the work of one with a more complex game. And he is becoming bolder. At that moment the door opened and Mr. Vetch appeared, his spectacles catching the light. Mr. Holmes, Mr. Grimwell requests your attendance in his office. He says it is urgent. We followed Vetch down the corridor, Harding trailing behind. Grimwell stood at his desk, a single sheet of paper before him. His usual cold composure was cracked by an undercurrent of fury. This arrived by messenger not 5 minutes past, he said, handing it to Holmes. The note was even shorter than the first. You have not replied. The next message will not be on paper. Holmes folded it carefully. Hand-delivered again? Yes. Briggs swears he saw no one approach. Holmes glanced at Harding. Who else was in the entrance hall? Saunders, briefly. He came up from the telegraph office. Holmes said nothing for a moment, then looked at Grimwell. This confirms what I feared. Our adversary is in this building now and moving with confidence. He wishes you to feel his reach. Grimwell's jaw tightened. Then I insist you act, Mr. Holmes. Take whomever you suspect and be done with it. Holmes's voice was calm, almost conversational. An arrest without certainty would serve him far better than us. No, Mr. Grimwell, he is circling for a reason, and I must know what quarry he truly seeks before I close the net. He turned to me. Watson, I want eyes in the hall, yours. Note every movement, every glance toward the stair, every errand that takes a person from their station. I took my post beside the great clock, feeling like a sentry on a battlefield where the enemy might be anyone who passed. In the next half hour I observed Miss Sloane cross twice to the telegraph room, once with papers, once with an empty hand. Saunders flitted between desk and door, restless. Vetch disappeared into the archive room and emerged pale and tight-lipped, and Harding himself descended to the vault, returning some minutes later with a ledger. Then came a small commotion. Mullins, the night watchman, had arrived early, limping into the hall and asking for Mr. Harding. I saw Harding meet him with a quick word, and the two moved into a side corridor out of sight. Holmes rejoined me shortly after, his eyes bright. It begins, Watson. He cannot resist the chance to strike again while Lestrade's mind is fixed upon the wrong man. What do you expect? I asked. Not expect, no, he said. When a mind delights in control, the greatest temptation is to prove it again. This afternoon we shall see whether his desire to unsettle outweighs his caution. Even as he spoke, a faint odor drifted from the stair to the vault, a sharper tang than before, metallic and sour, that made the back of my throat prickle. Harding appeared at the landing, his voice urgent. Mr. Holmes, there's something you must see below. At once. Holmes's face was unreadable, but I recognized the subtle tightening at the corners of his mouth. Come, Watson. The game has shifted a point further. We descended into the dim vault corridor once more, and before Harding even opened the great iron door I could smell that acrid bite. Inside, upon the second oak table, the one untouched that morning, lay another tin box, this time open, its contents a jumble of scattered certificates. Across the wood beneath it ran the same neat scorch ring, fresh and black. And the clock on the wall, still unwound from its morning stoppage, now stood at a different hour entirely, 23 minutes past 4. Holmes stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the scene. He is no longer content to haunt the morning. He strikes in broad day with half the building above us. Bold, very bold. He turned to me with that peculiar glint in his eye I had learned to associate with the scent of imminent revelation. Watson, this is no longer a question of how alone. It is becoming very much a question of who dares. Chapter 8. Holmes tests a theory. Holmes did not move at once toward the fresh scorch ring. He stood in the center of the vault, his head inclined a fraction, eyes half closed, as though listening for the slow settling of some mechanism that had already done its work. Harding and I waited, the hush in the stone chamber disturbed only by the faint hiss of the single gas jet above us. When Holmes did speak, it was in that soft tone he used when shaping a line of thought aloud. Same technique, same precision, but on a different table. The hour marked, he glanced at the clock, is within the last 20 minutes. Yet no one saw a soul descend. Harding shifted uneasily. That corridor is seldom empty, Mr. Holmes. Someone must have passed. Holmes's eyes opened, keen now. Precisely. Which is why I think our culprit has found a way to make himself unremarkable in passage. Watson, note the box. I stepped forward. Unlike the morning's tin container, this one bore a faint streak of residue along its rim, a white powder almost imperceptible against the dull metal. Holmes produced a glass vial from his pocket and, using the tip of his penknife, collected a few grains. The same substance, he murmured, but less carefully handled. That tells us our man, or woman, worked in some haste. Perhaps he feared interruption. And see here, he pointed to a minute fragment of paper caught in the box's hinge. I plucked it free. It was no larger than my fingernail, printed with a portion of a number and the tail of an ornate letter. A bond certificate? I suggested. Or a forgery, Holmes returned. Either would fit the pattern of a mind bent on undermining confidence before removing the true prize. He replaced the box exactly where it had been found and straightened. Mr. Harding, lock this vault now. Let no one in until I give the word. But. No buts. The play is entering its second act, and I intend to alter the stage without warning the performer. Upstairs, Holmes asked Harding to gather Vetch, Miss Sloane, Saunders and Briggs in the consultation room. Mullins was to remain at his post in the hall. Harding himself was told to return to the director's floor and act as though nothing had occurred. When the four entered, Holmes greeted them pleasantly, almost carelessly. A small matter, ladies and gentlemen. The directors have asked me to take certain precautions for the security of the premises. I shall therefore be making small inquiries, harmless but necessary. He began with Saunders, questioning him about the afternoon's errands. The young clerk explained that he had twice visited the telegraph office and once taken a letter to the post. Holmes asked the times, then had him describe which stair he used on each occasion. Saunders answered readily, his hands open on his knees. Miss Sloane, when asked, confirmed she had crossed to the telegraph room twice but had not descended to the vault or the porter's stair. Her gaze was steady, her voice composed. Briggs stated he had remained in the hall throughout, save for a brief visit to the cellar to check the coal delivery. Curious, Holmes remarked. None of you descended, yet the vault saw a visitor. Tell me, Mr. Vetch, your movements? Vetch adjusted his spectacles. I went into the archive room for a file, then to Mr. Grimwell's office, then remained at my desk until now. Holmes regarded him a moment, then smiled faintly. You are all models of diligence. One might almost think the vault had played its latest trick alone. A puzzled silence followed, which Holmes broke by glancing toward the window. That will be all for now. I shall keep my watch in my own fashion. When they had gone, I turned to him. Holmes, was that not a wasted exercise? They told you nothing new. On the contrary, he said, they told me everything I needed. Did you note how each recited his movements without once asking why I wished to know? That is the mark of the prepared mind, ready to account for itself because it has rehearsed the account. You think one of them rehearsed a false alibi? No, sir. Yet the corridor between here and the stair is narrow. One would have to pass you to reach the street. Mullins hesitated. Only one did, sir, Miss Sloane. She said she'd been sent to fetch a ledger from Mr. Harding's office and was on her way up. Harding frowned. I sent no such message. Holmes's eyes glinted. No. But someone did. And that, Watson, is the first overt misstep we have seen. Without another word he strode to the consultation room and sent for Miss Sloane. She arrived calm as ever, her hands clasped neatly, though I thought I detected a faint flush in her cheeks. Miss Sloane, Holmes said gently, this morning you descended to the vault. What errand took you there? I was told by Mr. Saunders that Mr. Harding required a ledger at once, she replied without hesitation. I found the vault door open but heard voices in the corridor, so I assumed Mr. Harding was near. Holmes's gaze never left her face. You did not see anyone inside? No, Mr. Holmes. And Saunders, where was he when he gave you this message? In the archive room, sir, sorting files. Holmes inclined his head. Thank you, Miss Sloane. That will be all. When she had gone, Harding looked perplexed. You think she? I think, Holmes said, that Saunders has just revealed himself as more than a restless young clerk. By sending Miss Sloane to the vault, he created both a distraction and an alibi. The open door draws attention from the true purpose, the cabinet. Harding stared. But Saunders is barely more than a boy. Holmes allowed himself a faint smile. Criminal ingenuity is not a matter of years, but of temperament. He found Saunders at his desk, head bent studiously over a ledger. Mr. Saunders, Holmes said, you have a talent for errands? This morning you sent Miss Sloane below. Why? Saunders looked up, startled. She's quicker than I am with the ledgers, sir. I thought. You thought to be in two places at once, Holmes interrupted. One, here in the respectable bustle of the office, the other below in the quiet of the vault, where a friend or accomplice might admit you unseen. I don't, Saunders began, but Holmes raised a hand. You will have a chance to speak later. For now you will remain within sight. If you are innocent you will wish to be cleared, if not you will wish to flee. I advise the former. Holmes turned away without waiting for an answer, his expression remote. In the corridor he said to me, we are close, Watson. Our adversary is testing his reach, 2 strikes in as many days, each bolder than the last. The next will be his undoing if we are ready. And how will we be ready? I asked. Holmes's smile was thin. By giving him precisely the opportunity he believes he seeks, and ensuring that, this time, he cannot take it without revealing his hand entirely. As we left the bank, the fog seemed to have thickened, curling along the street in heavy folds. I could not shake the sense that the unseen figure behind these staged miracles was already moving within it, preparing for the moment Holmes was now quietly arranging, a moment that, for the first time, felt perilously close. Chapter 10. The true motive begins to surface. Holmes said little as we made our way back to Baker Street, his long stride cutting through the fog with mechanical precision. Once at our rooms, he settled into his armchair, fingers steepled, the firelight catching in his gray eyes. I knew better than to interrupt him when he wore that expression, part focus, part detachment, yet my own thoughts were far from calm. 2 staged miracles in the vault, a broken cabinet lock, and now this elaborate dance of messages and misdirection. It was a net drawing tighter, but around whom? At length Holmes spoke, as though continuing an internal monologue I had not been party to. It is always revealing, Watson, when the mechanics of a crime are unnecessarily elaborate. It suggests that the mechanism is not the end, but the message. The message. I echoed. Exactly. Consider our fire that does not burn. A curiosity, yes, but hardly a practical means to steal. It was intended to draw the eye, to unsettle. And what has it unsettled? Not the public, yet, but the directors of Grimwell and Company, and one man in particular. Grimwell himself. Holmes nodded. He is the true audience for these spectacles. The residue in the vault, the stopped clock, the neat scorch rings, all are flourishes calculated to suggest an adversary who controls both time and flame. Grimwell is a man of precision. The thought that such forces can intrude into his sealed domain without his consent, that strikes at the very core of his identity. You think it is personal, then? Deeply personal, Holmes said. And personal motives, Watson, are more enduring than mere greed. Money buys an opportunity, resentment buys patience. Our culprit has both. He rose suddenly and crossed to the desk, spreading out the notes I had seen him make over the past 2 days, sketches of the vault's layout, timings of the staff's movements, a list of who had reason to be near the gas lines. Observe, he said, tapping the list. Vetch, linked to the vault by duty, engaged to Grimwell's niece. Miss Sloane, keeper of the catalogues, loyal to Harding. Saunders, young, ambitious, placed in proximity to both the telegraph and the street door. Briggs, custodian of the clock and the gas jets. Each of these could, in theory, have played some part. But which has cause to direct his malice at Grimwell himself? I considered. Vetch, perhaps? The engagement might be troubled. Holmes's mouth curved faintly. Possibly. But also consider Harding. His loyalty to Grimwell is professional, but the balance between them may be delicate. Yet Harding lacks the temperament for such theatrical touches. And Saunders? Holmes's eyes narrowed. Our lively young friend. He has the energy and the nerve, but would he have the patience to plan such a campaign? The use of ammonium chloride, the manipulation of the gas lines, those require both technical knowledge and the discipline to execute without haste. No, Saunders is more likely an accomplice than the architect. He turned back to the fire, speaking almost to himself. A mind that knows the vault's layout, the habits of the staff, and the vulnerabilities of the bank's reputation. A hand that can work locks without noise, yet prefers to leave them visibly disturbed. A temperament that enjoys control, but also enjoys letting others know that control has been exercised. There was a pause, then Holmes faced me again. Tomorrow we begin the final movement. But first I must have certain facts from Mr. Grimwell, facts he has so far declined to share. The next morning we arrived early at the bank, the fog lying thicker still. Grimwell received us in his office, his manner guarded. Mr. Grimwell, Holmes began without preamble, I will speak plainly. These events are aimed at you. I cannot defend your bank if you keep from me the matter which has provoked them. Grimwell's expression chilled. You overstep, Mr. Holmes? Holmes leaned forward, his voice low but firm. On the contrary, I tread the only ground that matters. 2 public demonstrations in your vault, each a mockery of your security, a forced cabinet, now messages implying greater damage to come. Your adversary is not striking at your funds but at your authority. Why? For a moment I thought Grimwell would dismiss us outright. Then, with visible reluctance, he rose and crossed to the window, speaking with his back to us. The clerk froze, then straightened slowly. In the gaslight his face was pale, his spectacles glinting. For a moment he seemed on the point of bolting, but Holmes moved to block the door. Kindly place the tool on the table, Holmes said, and remove your gloves. Vetch obeyed, his movements stiff. You cannot prove. On the contrary, Holmes interrupted. I can prove more than you think. You have been in this vault 3 times in as many days, each time arranging a spectacle calculated to alarm Mr. Grimwell. You tampered with the gas lines from the porter's stair, employed ammonium chloride to produce scorch without heat, and stopped the clock to add a note of impossible mystery. Tonight, you came to claim what you believe to be documents damaging to your future uncle by marriage. Vetch's mouth tightened. You think this is for myself? You're wrong. This is justice, for Clara, for her uncle's tyranny over her life and over this place. Fell offered the means, I provided the hand. Holmes regarded him steadily. An elaborate revenge, Mr. Vetch. But revenge seldom ends where one intends. Your displays have made too many ripples. Police interest, public suspicion. Even Mr. Fell would see the danger in continuing. Vetch said nothing, but the defiance in his eyes was plain. Holmes turned to me. Watson, fetch Harding and Mullins. We shall require witnesses. By the time they arrived, Vetch had sunk into the chair by the table, his hands clasped before him. Harding's face was grave as he heard the brief account, and Mullins, with a soldier's economy, simply took up position by the door. Holmes closed the oaken brass case, the red seal untouched. Our friend has answered the question of how. The matter of why will keep for the morning, when Mr. Grimwell can hear it for himself. For now we shall secure both the vault and Mr. Vetch. As we left the vault, I caught the faintest trace of that acrid scent still clinging to the air, like the ghost of the game that had been played here. And I could not help but feel that, though the trap had sprung, Holmes's mind was already turning to the deeper layers of motive he had yet to lay bare. Chapter 12. The Moment of Recognition. It was a cold and gray dawn when Holmes, Harding and I sat once more in Grimwell's office, the heavy drapes drawn back to admit the weak morning light. The oak desk between us still bore the unopened case that had served as bait. Vetch sat to one side under Mullins' watch, his hands resting on his knees, the defiance of the night before tempered now into a tight, watchful silence. Grimwell's face was a mask of icy composure, but I noticed the slight tightening of his jaw as his eyes fell on Vetch. I had expected, he said quietly, some petty thief from outside, not one of my own trusted clerks. Holmes leaned forward, his fingertips pressed together. With respect, Mr. Grimwell, you may have expected wrongly because the performance was designed for you to do so. Mr. Vetch's role in this business is not in question. He was in the vault last night, caught in the act. But the authorship of this series of demonstrations is another matter entirely. Harding frowned. But surely... Holmes raised a hand. Let us revisit the sequence. First, the original scorch ring, a display contrived with ammonium chloride and controlled heat, placed beneath a sealed tin box. No saved, merely spectacle. Second, a stopped clock, at a time of the culprit's choosing, to suggest control over the very hours within the vault. Third, a repetition of the phenomenon in broad daylight, with the vault door found ajar, and the lock of a cabinet forced yet its contents undisturbed. And finally, our baited case, calculated to draw the hand that had grown bold. Grimwell's eyes narrowed. You have described what we all know. The question is, why this elaborate charade? Because, Holmes said, his voice low but firm, it is the perfect weapon against a man whose authority rests upon the perception of absolute control. You, Mr. Grimwell. Vetch shifted in his chair. I told you last night, this was justice. Clara's life is dictated by her uncle's iron hand. He decides who is worthy, what alliances are permissible. She's to marry only a man who bends to him. Holmes regarded him for a long moment, then shook his head slightly. And yet, Mr. Vetch, your movements, while complicit, reveal you as an accessory rather than the guiding mind. The precision of the gas line tampering, the choice of compound, the manipulation of the clock mechanism. These are the marks of a hand with long familiarity with the building's physical systems. Yours is a clerk's knowledge, but this is the work of a custodian. Harding's brows rose. A custodian? You can't mean Briggs? Holmes's gaze turned toward the door, where Briggs himself had just entered with the morning's post, his eyes flicking uncertainly from face to face. Indeed, Mr. Harding, Holmes said evenly, I can, and I do. The powder found on the guard of the gas jet was traced to a supply kept in the cellar, to which Briggs alone among the staff has unrestricted access. The key marks on the vault door were made by one who habitually works its locks, not with a thief's hurried pick, but with the slow care of the man who oils its hinges. Briggs's hands tightened on the bundle of letters. You've no proof of that, he muttered. Holmes's eyes were unyielding. On the contrary. The residue in the vault matched that found on the brim of your cap, picked up when you leaned beneath the gas jet to set your little miracle in motion. And the clock, Briggs, your clock. Who else but you wins it? Who else could stop it so neatly without a scratch or dent? Vetch may have thought himself the engineer of Grimwell's humiliation, but it was you who provided the means, and you who enjoyed the performance most. Vetch turned sharply toward Briggs, color rising in his cheeks. You told me how to do it, said Fell would pay. Briggs dropped the letters on the desk, his face hardening. And you were fool enough to believe me. Fell wanted a man inside to rattle Grimwell's cage, make him feel he wasn't master here. You wanted to spite him for his hold over Miss Clara. You thought you were partners, but you were my instrument as much as his. Holmes sat back, the faintest glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. And so the pieces fall into place. Briggs, you were the true architect. Vetch, the hand that moved when the time came. Fell supplied the motive, revenge against Grimwell, and the funds. You, Briggs, supplied the knowledge and the relish of a craftsman setting his mechanism in motion. Grimwell's gaze was cold as he looked from one to the other. And the purpose of all this? Merely to unsettle me? Holmes inclined his head. To erode your authority, to plant whispers of insecurity, to weaken the confidence of your clients before Fell moved against you in business. It was a campaign, not a single blow. There was a long silence in the office, broken only by the faint hiss of the gas lamps. At last Grimwell spoke. Mr. Harding, fetch the police. I believe Inspector Lestrade will be glad to learn that his first instinct was only half mistaken. As Harding left, Vetch sat with his head bowed, the last of his defiance draining away. Briggs stared fixedly at the far wall, his jaw set. Holmes, meanwhile, studied the sealed oaken brass case on the desk with an almost idle air, as though the game were already over in his mind. Watson, he said quietly, you see now the symmetry? The same mind that could charm a flame into leaving paper untouched could just as easily charm a clerk into thinking himself the avenger of a wrong. Every device, every movement was calculated not only for effect but for concealment of the true hand. I nodded, though my mind was still caught on the thought of how near Grimwell's adversaries had come to their goal. The vault, the bank, and the man himself had been played like pieces on a board, and it had taken all of Holmes's patience to watch the moves unfold until the moment of recognition was clear. Lestrade arrived not long after, brisk and businesslike, his satisfaction barely concealed as he heard the account. 2 for the price of 1, Holmes? I'll take them both. Fell will keep for now, but with these 2 ready to speak, we'll have him soon enough. When they had been led away, Grimwell extended a stiff hand toward Holmes. You have done your work, sir. I cannot say I relish the manner in which the truth came to light, but I acknowledge its value. Holmes accepted the hand with polite detachment. Truth, Mr. Grimwell, is rarely served without a measure of discomfort. In this case, I fear the taste will linger. As we stepped out into the clearing morning, the last tatters of fog drifting away, I glanced at my companion. You had your culprit long before the trap, didn't you? Holmes's smile was fleeting. I had the shape of him, Watson. But a shadow is not enough. One must wait until the shadow moves in step with the man. And with that, he hailed a passing hansom, leaving behind the bank that for 3 days had been a theater for one of the most intricate performances I had yet seen him unravel. Chapter 13. The Final Attempt to Escape. The day after Briggs and Vetch were taken into custody dawned bright and brittle, the fog burned away by a sharp wind out of the east. It seemed the air itself had been scoured clean of the sour tang that had hung about Grimwell's bank, and yet Holmes moved with a wariness I knew well. He was not one to consider a matter finished simply because the immediate actors had been removed from the stage. We arrived at Chancery Lane mid-morning, intending to collect a few final statements from Harding and to examine the vault now that it lay dormant. The clerks went about their work with subdued relief, though more than one cast an uneasy glance toward the director's offices. Grimwell himself was not present. Harding explained that he had gone to meet a solicitor regarding the formal charges. Holmes had just bent to inspect the repaired lock on the cabinet when Harding's assistant appeared at the door, pale and breathless. "Sir, there's a man in the front hall asking to see Mr. Grimwell. Says it's urgent, to do with the bank's security." Harding frowned. "Who is he?" The assistant shook his head. "Wouldn't give a name. Says Mr. Grimwell will regret not hearing him." Holmes straightened at once, the gleam in his eyes sharpening. "Watson, this has the scent of unfinished business. Let us have a look at our visitor." In the hall, a tall man in a dark coat stood with his back to us, his gloved hands clasped loosely behind him. There was something studied about his stillness, as if each movement were weighed before it was made. When he turned at the sound of our approach, I recognized the gaunt, hawk-like features from descriptions Holmes had given me years before. Jonathan Fell. "Mr. Holmes," he said smoothly as though greeting an old acquaintance. "I believe you've been meddling in a small matter of mine." Holmes inclined his head. "Meddling is such a subjective term, Mr. Fell. I might say I have been removing your more troublesome pieces from the board." Fell's smile did not reach his eyes. "Briggs and Vetch? Minor agents, nothing more. You mistake the removal of 2 pawns for the end of the game." "On the contrary," Holmes replied, "I am well aware that the hand directing them remains free. Which is why you are here, to salvage something from the wreckage before your name is spoken in court." Fell's gaze flicked toward Harding. "My quarrel is with Grimwell, not his underlings. Tell him I offer a final opportunity to resolve our disagreement without public unpleasantness." Holmes's voice was mild. "A threat then?" "An arrangement," Fell corrected. "By tonight he will know whether to accept it." With that, he turned on his heel and strode out into the street, the sharp click of his boots fading into the noise of passing cabs. Harding's face had gone grim. What do you suppose he meant? Holmes looked toward the high windows, his brow furrowed. That the campaign is not yet over, and that he intends one last stroke, bold enough to shift the ground under Grimwell before the law can close upon him. We spent the remainder of the morning in the vault, Holmes inspecting every hinge, lock and line of gas pipe as though expecting them to speak. Shortly before noon he paused, head cocked, and said softly, "Listen." At first I heard nothing beyond the faint hum of the gas and the distant scrape of a clerk's pen upstairs. Then, a metallic tick, irregular, from somewhere beneath the floor. Holmes knelt, running his hand along the flagstones until he found a hairline crack in the mortar. "Our friend has been busy," he murmured. With Harding's help, we lifted the slab to reveal a narrow cavity where a small metal canister nestled among coils of wire. Holmes examined it without touching. A crude timer, Watson, but effective enough. Had it been left, it would have vented gas into the vault in less than an hour, long enough to be noticed, too late to prevent a spectacle. A last message from Mr. Fell. Harding wiped a hand across his brow. "Can it be made safe?" Holmes removed the wires with deft precision and passed the inert device to me. "There, no danger now. But its presence tells us Fell has a more intimate knowledge of this building than I had assumed. Someone still inside is aiding him." That suspicion was confirmed sooner than expected. As we replaced the flagstone, the faint creak of a footstep came from the corridor beyond the vault door. Holmes moved silently to the threshold and opened it with a suddenness that made the figure outside recoil. It was Saunders, the junior clerk, his eyes wide. I was looking for Mr. Harding," he stammered. Holmes's voice was very soft. And you expected to find him beneath the floor of the vault? Saunders swallowed hard. I was told, Mr. Fell said. Holmes stepped into the corridor and the young man's shoulders slumped. He came to me weeks ago, Saunders admitted. Said he could help me out of my debts if I carried messages, left doors unlatched. I didn't know he'd turn the bank into his stage? Holmes finished for him. No. But you knew enough to refuse and you did not. That is enough. We escorted Saunders upstairs, leaving him in Harding's charge with instructions that he was not to leave the building. Holmes then sent Mullins to the nearest police station with the disabled device, his message to Lestrade simple. Fell will act before nightfall, be ready. As we stepped out into the sunlight, Holmes's manner was brisk. This is his last throw, Watson. With his intermediaries exposed, Fell must strike directly if he is to salvage his scheme. He will do so under the cover of negotiation, offering Grimwell terms while ensuring a final disruption occurs in tandem. Our task is to ensure the disruption fails. I looked at him sidelong. And how do you propose to do that? Holmes's smile was thin. By being where Fell does not expect us to be, at the precise moment he most needs us absent. It was a plan I had seen him employ before, to allow the adversary to believe the stage was clear, only to step from the wings at the instant the curtain was meant to fall. And as we made our preparations for the evening, I could not shake the sense that this final act would be the most dangerous yet, for both sides. Chapter 14. Holmes closes in, the final clue revealed. The bank's upper offices were nearly deserted by the time the late afternoon shadows began to lengthen across Chancery Lane. Most of the clerks had been dismissed early on Harding's orders, and only a skeleton staff remained. Mullins at his post in the hall, Harding in his office under the pretense of routine work, and Holmes and I, ostensibly gone, keeping to a cramped records closet on the third floor that overlooked both the director's corridor and the main hall below. Holmes had chosen our vantage with care. From this narrow slit of a window in the door, he could observe the comings and goings of anyone approaching Grimwell's private rooms, while the muffled acoustics of the hallway carried even the faintest footstep to our ears. We are in essence lying in ambush, I murmured, shifting on the uncomfortable stool. Not in essence, Watson, Holmes replied softly. In fact, Fell will come himself, but he will not arrive like a common petitioner. He will have arranged an interview through some plausible intermediary, perhaps through Harding's office, so that when he enters no one will think it unusual. What we must watch for is not his entrance, but the moment his hand moves. And you expect him to attempt something here, above, not in the vault? Exactly. The vault has been his theater thus far, but with Briggs, Vetch and now Saunders removed from the stage, the lower corridors are watched and the locks are changed. He will need a fresh venue to produce his final miracle, and one that will sting Grimwell's pride more than any damage to the furniture below. We waited in the dimness. The corridor beyond lay quiet, the only movement the occasional pass of Mullins at the far end. My eyes had begun to grow heavy from the strain of peering through the narrow gap when a brisk knock echoed faintly from Harding's office door. A clerk's voice, Saunders, held under watch but evidently allowed to assist in minor tasks, called, "Mr. Harding, there's a gentleman to see Mr. Grimwell. Says he's expected." I glanced at Holmes, his eyes had brightened. "Here we go, Watson," he murmured. Harding's reply was suitably measured. "Show him to the director's anteroom. I'll see if Mr. Grimwell can receive him." Through our slit we saw the tall, angular figure of Jonathan Fell appear at the far end of the corridor, led by Saunders. Fell's expression was one of courteous impatience, as though any delay were an impertinence. He was admitted to the anteroom and left there while Harding, playing his part, walked toward Grimwell's office. Holmes moved to the door, opening it a fraction wider so that we might hear better. The silence in the corridor took on a taut quality. Then, soft as a cat's tread, Fell's steps emerged from the anteroom. He glanced both ways, then moved to Grimwell's door, producing a small flat case from his coat. Holmes's hand touched my arm. "Watch," he breathed. From the case, Fell drew a narrow metal tube with a fine nozzle, attaching it to a tiny reservoir. He bent to the keyhole, inserted the nozzle and depressed a hidden trigger. A faint hiss reached us, followed by the unmistakable acrid tang we had come to associate with the vault's staged fires. "He means to smoke the office," I whispered, "as he did below." "Precisely," Holmes replied. "But here the purpose is different, not to suggest fire without flame, but to ruin whatever papers Grimwell might store within. And if Grimwell should enter at the right moment, why, the man's pride and his temper will be engaged before his reason. A quarrel, an offer to resolve the damage quietly, Fell's coup de theatre. Fell straightened, stowing the device with the economy of a man long accustomed to working under pressure. Then he reached for the handle. That was Holmes's moment. In 3 silent strides he was in the corridor, his hand closing on Fell's shoulder. "I believe that is far enough, Mr. Fell." The hawk-like face turned toward him, the eyes narrowing. "You again." "Yes," Holmes said pleasantly. "And this time without the bother of intermediaries. You will hand me the device if you please." Fell's gaze flicked down the corridor, measuring the distance to the stair, but Mullins had appeared at the far end, his solid frame blocking the way. Slowly, Fell extended the metal tube toward Holmes. "I suppose you think this is the end of it," Fell said. "It is the end of this act," Holmes replied. "You miscalculated, Mr. Fell. By repeating the chemical signature of your vault demonstrations, you linked this attempt to your earlier work already traced through your accomplices. You might have escaped had you chosen an entirely different method. But habit is the downfall of the skilled criminal. You cannot resist your own signature." Fell's lips curled. "Signature? You make it sound like art." "For you perhaps it is," Holmes said. "But for the law, it is merely evidence." By then Harding had emerged from his office, his expression one of mingled satisfaction and relief. "You caught him in the act?" "In the moment before it," Holmes corrected. "Mr. Fell is too capable to be left to his own devices, quite literally, any longer." Within the hour, Lestrade had arrived to take Fell into custody. Holmes gave a concise account, presenting the metal tube, the small reservoir of ammonium chloride, and a folded note found in Fell's coat pocket, one addressed to an associate in Antwerp, outlining terms for the conclusion of the Grimwell matter. As the inspector led Fell away, Grimwell turned to Holmes. "I owe you more than I care to admit, Mr. Holmes. This would have been most damaging." Holmes's reply was mild. "Damage was always the object. Your adversary never intended real destruction, only the appearance of it to erode your position. But appearances, Mr. Grimwell, can cut as deeply as reality, given the right audience." When we finally stepped out into the crisp night air, I felt the knot of tension that had gripped me ease at last. "So the campaign is over," I said. "For Grimwell's bank, yes," Holmes replied. "But for us, Watson, it is merely another reminder that the cleverest mechanism is useless if one forgets the mind behind it." Fell believed himself master of time and flame. In the end, he was mastered by his own pattern. He hailed a cab, his eyes alight with that rare spark of satisfaction that came when a case's final piece clicked into place. "Come, Watson. There is still the small matter of writing it up, though I suggest you resist the temptation to title it The Fire That Stopped Time. The case was never about fire after all, but about control." Chapter 15, The Final Gathering. The following morning, Holmes received a note from Inspector Lestrade requesting his presence at the yard. The handwriting, though neat, betrayed a certain eagerness. Lestrade had in mind, no doubt, a tidy conclusion to present to his superiors. Holmes read it over breakfast with a faint smile and tucked it into his pocket. "Lestrade," he said, "wishes me to assemble the entire company of this little drama, Grimwell, Harding, Mullins and the remaining clerks, so that he may tie off the ends with a flourish." "And you intend to oblige him?" I asked. Holmes reached for the coffee pot. "On the contrary, Watson, I intend to oblige myself. There are a few threads yet dangling, and I prefer to trim them before they catch in other hands. We shall hold the gathering at the bank. Grimwell's private room will serve." By mid-afternoon the party was assembled. Grimwell, his expression granite; Harding, businesslike and attentive; Mullins as impassive as a sentry; Miss Sloane, Saunders and 2 junior clerks; and finally Lestrade, bustling in with the air of a man who smells the end of a case and is eager to sign his name beneath it. Holmes took the head of the long table, his fingertips pressed together. "Gentlemen and Miss Sloane, thank you for attending. We meet not to revisit the events of the past week, but to place them in their proper order. Only in the full light of that order can we see how Mr. Fell's designs were able to take root in this house." Grimwell shifted in his chair. "We have the architect in custody. Must we rake over the matter further?" Holmes's gaze did not waver. "We must, because a structure is not weakened by the architect alone. It fails because certain supports are already compromised. In this case, those supports were your staff, 3 of them to be precise, whose weaknesses were exploited for Mr. Fell's purpose." I saw Lestrade's eyes gleam. The prospect of unmasking yet another conspirator was clearly to his liking. "Briggs," Holmes continued, "was the craftsman. He possessed the intimate knowledge of the vault's gas lines, locks and fixtures necessary to create the so-called fires, that left paper untouched. Vetch was the insider with access to the vault under legitimate pretexts. His grievance against you, Mr. Grimwell, made him susceptible to promises of revenge. Saunders? Here Holmes's gaze fixed upon the young clerk, who shifted uneasily, was the messenger and the decoy used to plant false errands and leave doors unlatched. Saunders flushed. You never considered, Holmes interrupted, that leaving a door unsecured or passing a note might be part of a larger scheme. Your debts provided the lever, Fell's money turned it. Miss Sloane sat very still, her eyes on Holmes. And the rest of us? She asked quietly. You, Miss Sloane, were never a participant, Holmes said. But you were observed, your irregular habits, your distaste for the vault's air. Fell's agents ensured you were sent there only when it served their misdirection, knowing your discomfort would make you eager to leave. Lestrade cleared his throat. All very neat, Holmes, but we've Briggs, Vetch, and Fell himself in custody. Saunders here may answer for his part. What's left to discuss? Holmes's smile was thin. The motive that bound these pieces together. Fell sought not money, at least not directly, but the erosion of Grimwell's authority. A bank's greatest asset is the confidence it inspires. A sequence of impossible breaches would undermine that confidence far more efficiently than any single theft. Once doubt took hold among clients and investors, Fell could move against Grimwell in the market with every chance of success. Grimwell's lips tightened, but he gave no sign of disagreement. Holmes went on, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. Each demonstration was calculated. The first to mystify, the second to suggest repetition, the third in daylight to show boldness, the fourth aimed at documents of supposed value to you personally. And the final act, Fell's presence in your own office, would have been the coup de grace played out in your sight. Harding exhaled slowly. And you chose to let the play run almost to its final act before intervening. Yes, Holmes said simply. Because in these matters, Watson will confirm, the surest way to trap a hand is to let it reach for the prize. Fell was too careful to incriminate himself directly until the moment came when his presence would seem natural. That was the moment I required. Lestrade looked as though he might object to having been kept in partial ignorance, but the satisfaction of having the case tied up kept him silent. Holmes rose then, resting his hands on the back of his chair. I will leave you with this caution. Mechanisms can be mended, locks replaced, staff dismissed. But a breach of trust, once accomplished, leaves a fissure that will close only slowly. I suggest, Mr. Grimwell, that you attend to the fissure with as much care as you would to the vault door. Grimwell inclined his head. Your point is taken, Mr. Holmes. With that, the gathering broke apart. Lestrade busied himself with Saunders, taking down particulars for a formal statement. Mullins returned to his post, and Miss Sloane slipped away without a word. Harding accompanied us to the street, the pale winter light slanting across his tired features. You've given us the means to set things right, he said to Holmes. Whether we manage it is another question. Holmes regarded him gravely. The means are enough for now. The rest lies in the discipline to use them. As we walked back toward Baker Street, I ventured, you seemed reluctant to deliver a triumphant conclusion in there. Holmes gave a small shrug. The object was never triumph, Watson. It was balance. One does not topple a tower merely to see it fall. One straightens it so it may stand again. Fell's campaign was aimed at the mind as much as the material. My answer had to address both. I looked at him sidelong. And do you believe Grimwell has learned anything from the experience? Holmes's smile was fleeting. If he has not, Watson, the fissure will widen again, and then there will be another Fell wearing a different name. We turned the corner, the bustle of the city closing in once more. The case of the fire that stopped time had, for the moment, reached its end, but I could not shake the feeling that its lessons would linger far longer than its spectacle. Chapter 16. The Reveal. Holmes breaks down the crime. The following evening found Holmes and me once again before the familiar fire at Baker Street. Outside, a fine drizzle pattered against the window panes, turning the lamplight into soft halos. I had taken up my notes on the matter of the fire that stopped time, intending to set them in order for my eventual account, when Holmes, who had been lying silent, pipe in hand, rose abruptly and began to pace. You will forgive me, Watson, he said, but I cannot allow the case to pass into your chronicles without placing each step of its mechanism in its proper sequence. Much of the satisfaction lies in the pattern, and if we omit the pattern, the whole becomes a muddle of disconnected curiosities. I set down my pen. By all means, Holmes. I confess that some of your leaps were still obscure to me even as they unfolded. He stopped before the hearth, his eyes bright in the glow. Very well. Let us begin where the matter truly commenced, not with the first scorch ring in the vault, but with Jonathan Fell's grievance against Mr. Grimwell. Fell, having been denied a loan, saw that a direct attack on the bank's finances would be costly and uncertain. Instead, he chose the subtler and more effective method of undermining confidence in Grimwell's absolute control over his domain. By making it appear, I suggested, that impossible events could occur within the most secure part of the bank. Precisely, Holmes said. The vault was both symbol and stronghold. To show that it could be breached without theft, without even disturbing the papers, was to suggest that Grimwell's authority itself could be mocked. Now Fell could not execute such a campaign alone. He needed inside knowledge of the vault's physical arrangement, its gas lines, and the daily habits of those who entered it. Which brought in Briggs, I said. Holmes inclined his head. Briggs, the porter, whose duties placed him in close and constant contact with both the vault and its maintenance. His skill with gas jets and locks gave him the means to create the phenomenon, a brief, intense flare of heat directed upward through the gap in the table's join, using ammonium chloride to produce the visual effect without burning the papers above. That was the so-called fire that did not burn. And the stopped clock? Also Briggs's work. With his regular access, he could arrest the pendulum at any chosen time without damage, reinforcing the impression of supernatural control over the vault's environment. But Briggs was cautious. He preferred not to be seen in the vault when such demonstrations were discovered. Therefore, Fell required a more visible agent to handle the boxes and papers, someone whose presence there would not raise suspicion. Vetch, I said, recalling the pale, earnest face of Grimwell's head clerk. Just so, Holmes replied. Vetch, already resentful over Grimwell's interference in his engagement to Miss Clara, was ripe for manipulation. Briggs could instruct him in the timing and placement of each display. Fell could flatter his grievance into a sense of righteous cause. Vetch would carry the box to the table, arrange the scene, and leave, knowing that the scorch would appear moments later when Briggs operated the gas line from the porter's stair. And Saunders? I asked. The runner and mischief maker, Holmes said. His role was to create diversions, sending Miss Sloane to the vault on false errands, leaving doors unlatched, ensuring that Vetch or Briggs could slip in and out without attracting attention. His debts made him pliable, and Fell's money, or promises, were enough to secure his compliance. I nodded slowly. Then each of the four was essential: Fell for motive and design, Briggs for mechanism, Vetch for access, Saunders for diversion. Exactly, Holmes said. The sequence was as follows. First demonstration to mystify, second to show repetition, third in daylight to display boldness, fourth aimed at a cabinet lock to hint at theft without actual loss. Each act increased the pressure on Grimwell while making the police, and Lestrade in particular, look toward the wrong man, Briggs alone, so that the others might continue unnoticed. And the bait you set, the oak and brass case sealed with Grimwell's mark? That was designed to reverse the arrangement, Holmes said. By placing the apparent prize in the vault, I could draw Vetch inside, knowing his grievance would compel him to take the risk. His capture allowed me to confront him and judge whether he was the architect or merely the hand. His surprise at Briggs's duplicity confirmed the latter. The final link to Fell came with the device in Grimwell's office, a repetition of the same chemical signature, revealing that the mind behind the vault displays was present in person. Holmes resumed pacing, his hands clasped behind him. The beauty of the scheme lay in its restraint. Fell understood that true damage would alarm the police to the point of sealing the bank entirely. His aim was to keep the game alive long enough to whisper doubts among clients and potential investors. In that, he might have succeeded had he not grown overconfident and attempted his own hand in the last act. Which was his undoing, I said. Holmes's smile was faint but genuine. All men, Watson, have a signature. Some leave it in their handwriting, some in their gait, some in the choice of tools or the way they set a mechanism. Fell's was his chemical flourish, ammonium chloride for the eye, the stopped clock for the mind. He could no more abandon them than a poet could abandon his meter. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the fire crackling softly. At last I said, "It was, I think, one of your most intricate cases, requiring patience more than speed." Holmes regarded me thoughtfully. Patience, yes, but also the willingness to permit a certain measure of risk. The vault had to be played upon a few more times than comfort allowed before the pattern could be made complete. You may set it down as you see fit, Watson, but remember, the game was won not by anticipating every move, but by allowing the opponent to believe his victory was inevitable. I took up my pen once more. Outside, the drizzle had turned to a steady rain, tapping at the glass in an even rhythm, as though marking time until the next case would come to break our peace. Chapter 17. Unmasking the Mastermind. The rain of the previous night had left Baker Street glistening, and by mid-morning the light outside our window was thin and brittle, as though the day itself were reluctant to begin. Holmes was at his dressing table, knotting his cravat with the same precision he applied to any matter that engaged him. I knew the look on his face, calm, but with that particular brightness in his eyes that signified the endgame was near. "We will need to pay Mr. Fell a visit," he said without turning from the mirror. "Today will not do for writing reports, Watson. The case is not finished until the net is drawn in." "You believe he will confess?" I asked, reaching for my coat. Holmes gave a soft laugh. "Confession is for those whose vanity can bear the sting of exposure. Fell will require something more demonstrative. We must place him in a position where denial becomes an absurdity even to himself." We took a hansom to Fell's residence in St. James's Square, a townhouse of impeccable exterior, its polished brass fittings and gleaming stone a silent assertion of wealth. Inside, the air smelled faintly of sandalwood and something sharper, chemical, that immediately recalled to me the scorched vault table. Fell received us in a study lined with books, his manner urbane but cool. "To what do I owe this visit, Mr. Holmes? I trust the matter at the bank is concluded to Mr. Grimwell's satisfaction." Holmes seated himself without invitation, steepling his fingers. "On the contrary, it is concluded to my satisfaction, which is quite another thing. You see, the bank has its ledgers in order, but I am concerned with a different ledger, one of cause and consequence, of design and execution." Fell's eyes narrowed fractionally. "I'm not sure I follow." Holmes reached into his coat and withdrew a small glass vial. "A residue taken from the scorched oak in Grimwell's vault. You will note the crystalline deposits. Identical, down to the arrangement of impurities, to those found on the inkwell stand in Mr. Grimwell's own office. An inkwell stand which, curiously enough, you gifted him last spring. Even without chemical analysis, the link is most suggestive." The muscles at the corner of Fell's jaw tightened. "You mean to accuse me of something, Mr. Holmes? I suggest you speak plainly." Holmes leaned forward. "Very well. You orchestrated the vault disturbances through Briggs, Vetch, and Saunders, each of whom served a particular role. Your aim was not theft, but the erosion of confidence, an invisible cut at Grimwell's reputation, leaving you poised to acquire his holdings at a discount. But your vanity betrayed you. The chemical trick was your signature, just as the composition of your perfumes bears your unmistakable hand. You could not resist leaving it in the final act." For a moment Fell said nothing. The only sound was the faint tick of the ormolu clock on the mantel. Then he smiled, a slow, cold curve of the lips. "An ingenious theory, but lacking in proof that would satisfy a court." Holmes's reply was as smooth as the man himself. "Courts are not my concern, Mr. Fell. However, the threat of ruin in the court of public opinion, that is another matter. Imagine, if you will, the Times printing a full account, the vault tricks, the collusion of your associates, the signature chemical trace, the suggestion that your business successes owe as much to sabotage as to skill. How would your investors view such revelations?" The veneer of calm cracked. Fell's gaze flicked toward the door, perhaps calculating whether this conversation could be ended by force or interruption. Holmes, sensing the shift, rose to his feet. "I have no need to detain you further," he said, slipping the vial back into his pocket. "Your course is now your own to choose. But I advise you to disentangle yourself from Briggs, Vetch, and Saunders. They are about to find the law a less hospitable companion than they have known." We left without another word, the air outside feeling brisk and clean after the close, scented atmosphere of Fell's study. As we descended the steps I said, "You let him walk away." "For now," Holmes replied. "The pressure will mount from within his own circle. Briggs will talk to save himself. Vetch will seize any chance to lessen his culpability. By the time Lestrade takes his statements, Fell's name will be so entangled in their accounts that his choice will be between a quiet withdrawal from the field or the public disgrace I promised him." The following days proved Holmes correct. Word reached us that Briggs had, under questioning, admitted to operating the gas lines and stopping the clock, naming Fell as the originator of the plan. Vetch, confronted with Briggs's statement, added his own testimony about meetings in discreet coffee houses where instructions had been passed and payments made. Saunders, ever eager to save his own skin, corroborated both accounts in exchange for leniency. By the week's end, Fell's presence in London society had grown noticeably scarce. Invitations went unanswered. His name vanished from the betting books and club registers. Grimwell, for his part, made a great show of restoring the vault to perfect working order, though Holmes assured me that the true repair had been made the moment Fell realized the game was over. One evening, as we sat once more by the fire, I asked Holmes if he regretted not seeing Fell brought formally to trial. Holmes shook his head. The law is a blunt instrument, Watson. It may punish, but it rarely corrects. Fell's strength was in his reputation and his network. Both are gone. In his world, that is a sentence more severe than any the courts could devise. And so the matter of the fire that stopped time came to a close, not with the clang of the judge's gavel, but with the quieter, more certain ruin of the man who had dared to play with the machinery of trust itself. Chapter 18. The Quiet Ruin. The fog had rolled in thick from the river that evening, muffling the sound of wheels on Baker Street and giving the lamps outside our window a blurred, spectral halo. Holmes sat in his armchair, his long fingers resting lightly against one another, eyes fixed not on the fire but on some point far beyond it. I knew better than to interrupt when he was in such a mood. His silences were often as telling as his pronouncements. At length he stirred. "You have observed, Watson, that true victory in detection is rarely a matter of applause or ceremony." I set down the evening paper. "You mean Fell's case? There is no denying the outcome. His withdrawal from the city, the sale of his properties, the disbanding of his ventures. But I confess I had expected more." Holmes smiled faintly. "More in the way of handcuffs, you mean? My dear fellow, there are times when justice, to be complete, must take a subtler form. The courts could have fined him, even imprisoned him, but Fell's talent for reinvention might have allowed him to emerge elsewhere, untarnished. By dismantling the web on which his influence hung, we have ensured there will be no stage from which to begin again." In the days that followed our last visit to Fell, the threads had indeed unraveled exactly as Holmes predicted. Briggs, Vetch, and Saunders, each facing their own charges, had traded loyalty for self-preservation, their statements weaving a damning tapestry. It was not the law alone that undid Fell, but the collapse of trust among those who had once served him. In his circle, betrayal was contagious. Lestrade had called by that afternoon, his expression a mixture of grudging respect and faint irritation. "We've enough to tie Briggs and Vetch to the vault business," he said. "Saunders is a slippery one, but I'll see him netted yet. As for Fell, well, he's packed off to the continent. No extradition, not for what we can prove. But I'll tell you this, he won't be doing business in London again." Holmes offered him a cigarette, which Lestrade declined. "My dear Inspector, you may rest easy on that score. His capital is locked, his backers disavow him, and his name is as good as a curse in any gentleman's club this side of the Channel." When Lestrade had gone, I remarked, "It is a curious thing, Holmes. For all the complexity of the case, the chemical trick, the stage disturbances, it was vanity that betrayed him." Holmes's eyes brightened. "Precisely, Watson. It is the human element that is the hinge upon which every case turns. Fell might have kept his hands cleaner had he delegated the final flourish. But no, he could not resist leaving his own distinctive mark. It is an impulse I have encountered in criminals before, the desire not only to succeed, but to be known to have succeeded, if only to themselves. That, my friend, is where the mask always slips." Outside, the fog pressed closer against the panes, the street lamps glowing dimly through it. I could hear the clip of hooves, distant and hollow. Holmes rose, paced to the window, and stood there a moment before speaking again. "You see, Watson, the vault was never the target. It was merely the stage. Fell's real aim was to unseat Grimwell, to plant in the minds of clients the suspicion that their gold was not safe. That is why nothing was taken, why the disturbances were designed to confound rather than to rob. But the flaw in his plan lay in assuming no one would trouble to look beyond the performance. I thought of Grimwell, of his relief when the disturbances had ceased, and of how swiftly society had turned from Fell once the truth began to circulate in whispers. "And so you have not only solved the crime," I said, "but preserved a man's livelihood." Holmes turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "I have merely removed the hand from the lever, Watson. The balance will right itself." That night, as I set down my pen, I reflected on how quietly this case had ended. No dramatic arrests, no sensational trials, no final confrontation in the dead of night. Instead, it had closed with the quiet folding away of a man's influence, his empire reduced to so much dust in the fog. And yet, in that very quietness, there was a certain poetry. Holmes had often told me that the most satisfying victories are those where the world continues unaware of the battle fought to preserve it. As I banked the fire and the room settled into shadow, I realized this was one such victory, a case in which the fire that had once stopped time had been quenched, leaving nothing but a faint trace of smoke and the memory of its heat.